Okay, so you guys sent us this incredible book, right? Essentials of UI Design. It's by Arash Ahadzadeh. And I got to say, this is a great way to quickly get a grip on what makes a user interface really work. So we're going to take this book apart today, extract the good stuff, give you guys the fundamentals, and maybe even touch on some of those higher level techniques that we all want to master, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the most impressive things about this book right off the bat is just how much Ahadzadeh tries to pack in. It's like a seriously comprehensive guide. You go from literally defining what UI and UX even are, which he does a great job of, by the way. He uses this analogy of a car, where the code is the chassis, UX is how everything works together, and UI is the aesthetics, the look and feel, all the way to actually being able to use software like Sketch and Envision Studio,
Yeah. He goes through all of it. It's like having a mentor right there in the pages.
Totally. And it's not just the design stuff either. He talks about building your portfolio, how to actually present your work, and even stuff about, if you wanted to start your own UI/UX business, the entrepreneurial side of things. Pretty cool.
Really impressive. And the structure of the book is really clever too, I think. It's like he splits it into two main parts. The theory and then the practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. You got to have the foundation before you can build. Right.
Exactly. So chapters 1, 2, 4, and then 8, 9, and 10, those are all about the theory, the core principles. And then he gets into the application of all that in chapters 3, 5, 6, and 7. Those are the chapters where you're actually in the software getting your hands dirty.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And for today's deep dive, we're going to really zero in on those foundational principles, specifically chapter 2, which is called Design Basics, right? I think that's where we can unpack what makes a UI tick, what makes it truly effective and enjoyable to use.
Totally agree. We're going to break down those essential building blocks right from that chapter, give you guys a solid footing. So why don't we just jump right in? Okay, first up, we have something super fundamental, layout. And, the book makes a really interesting point here. It says there's not actually one single right way to arrange stuff on a screen.
Oh, I like that. I remember reading that. What matters most is that your layout is consistent. It has to make sense to the user.
Makes total sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be easy to understand. The user should be able to look at it and know exactly what's going on, right? And the book even shows examples where the spacing is different, between elements, but it still works because there's a clear visual hierarchy. There's that consistency we're talking about.
Yeah, it's about setting up a visual rhythm and sticking to it.
Exactly. And consistency, it's not just about making things look pretty or uniform. It's about making them usable. Doesn't matter if you're working on some complex web app or a simple mobile interface, these layout principles are key. So, okay, how we arrange stuff is super important, but then there's the next layer, right? Mm-hmm. Visual hierarchy. This is where we really guide the user's eye. It's about showing them what's important, what to focus on.
It's amazing how many tools a designer has to do that, right? To really manipulate how someone perceives what's important on a screen. And the book breaks it down to a bunch of different aspects, visual cues.
Yeah, let's go through them. So first, there's size.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Bigger elements grab our attention, right?
Yeah.
Then there's color. Brighter colors stand out more against a more muted background.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got alignment, right? If everything's lined up in one way and then one element breaks that alignment, it'll pop, right? It'll stand out. And contrast is a huge one too. Strong contrast really makes things stand out, right? Makes them noticeable.
Yeah, totally. And then there's proximity, right? Things that are grouped together that just feel related,
Mm-hmm.
And repetition. You repeat visual styles,
right,
and that tells the user, hey, these things are connected. Makes sense, right?
Absolutely. And we can't forget about white space either. The book says that using empty space around something can actually make it even more noticeable, It's almost like you're framing it or something.
Totally. It's about breathing room, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there was one thing the book mentioned about visual hierarchy that I thought was really cool. It really shifted my perspective.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
The book says that at the end of the day, it's the user who decides the hierarchy. It's whatever their eye is drawn to first, no matter what the designer wanted to be the most important.
That's a really good point. It's all about how the user actually experiences the design, not just what the designer thinks should happen.
For sure. Okay, so moving on from how we guide the eye, let's talk about something we actively try to avoid. Visual noise. This is something I'm sure we've all experienced, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like you're on a website and there's just too much going on, too much information, too many things to look at, and it's overwhelming, right? It makes it hard to focus, hard to find what you're looking for.
It's like trying to have a conversation at a really loud party where everyone's talking at once.
Exactly. And the book really stresses how important it is to get rid of anything that's not absolutely necessary. Like, if it doesn't have a clear purpose, get rid of it. Simplify, right?
And if you're not sure if your design is getting too cluttered, the book suggests getting feedback from users. It's simple, but effective.
Yeah, always a good idea. Users can tell you exactly what's working and what's not. Okay, so after visual noise, the book takes us into the realm of iconography, which, you can think of as like the visual language of your interface.
Yeah, it's like those little visual shortcuts, right? They communicate something quickly, whether it's an aspect of the design, some content, or a function. And the book makes a really good point. Effective icons should be super simple, crystal clear, and recognizable instantly. You don't want your users having to guess what something means.
And one practical tip here is to avoid redesigning icons that are already well established. Like everyone knows what the home icon looks like, or search, settings, things like that. If you try to get too creative, it can just confuse people. And there are loads of resources out there where you can find great standard icons ready to use.
Yeah, and if you do need to create your own custom icons, the key is to make sure they fit in with the overall design. And with each other, of course,
Yeah.
You want to have a consistent visual style across all of them. Okay, let's move on to something that's so often overlooked, but it's crucial. Typography.
Yeah, typography is interesting. The book describes it as like transforming language into a decorative visual element. And it is, right? It's so much more than just the words on the page. It's about how they look, how they feel, how they contribute to the experience.
And again, simplicity is key, especially when you're starting out. The book says to limit the number of different typefaces you use and also the range of sizes. It recommends starting with just 2 fonts, max. One for your headings, one for body text.
Yeah, that keeps things clean and readable, for sure. And I like that the book talks about using free versus paid fonts. It says free fonts are a good place to start, but if you do go for paid fonts, you got to pay attention to the licensing and, of course, let your clients know about any extra costs, right?
Absolutely. Being transparent is so important. And then it covers some basic typographical things, too, which is helpful, like letter spacing. Baseline, that invisible line, the text sits on the weight, light to bold, and the basic classifications, serif and sans serif. Really useful stuff for UI design. Now, color contrast, this is a big one, right?
Oh, yeah, huge. Using color well is like a fundamental skill for any visual designer. And the book stresses that in UI design, readability and legibility have got to come first.
Totally. And it says that, vibrant colors are good. They can enhance contrast, and that makes things easier to read, but you got to be careful not to overdo it. Too much contrast can actually be bad for your eyes, make things harder to read. So they recommend a mid-level contrast for body text, and then using higher contrast for specific things you want to highlight.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there are actually online tools, websites that can help you analyze the color contrast ratio between any 2 colors. That way you can make sure your designs meet accessibility standards and that they're readable for everyone.
That's really helpful. Okay, so we've talked about individual colors, but now let's talk about creating an entire color palette, right? A color scheme. Sometimes that can feel overwhelming, but the book breaks it down into manageable chunks. So typically you'll have primary, secondary, accent, neutral, and semantic colors.
Yeah, your primary colors are like your base colors, the ones you use the most. The book says to limit yourself to 3, ideally. And those are often going to be the brand colors, right?
That makes sense. And secondary colors, those are optional, but they can be helpful for visually separating different sections or features, giving things a little more visual interest. And then you have accent colors, which you use sparingly but strategically to highlight things like calls to action or important information.
Exactly. And then the neutral colors, like your grays, your off-whites, they're really important too because they give you that background, that visual balance, right? And then you have semantic colors, which are specifically about conveying meaning, like red for errors or warnings, green for success or confirmation, that kind of thing. And the book talks about how to choose these colors effectively using the color wheel, It explains some basic color relationships.
Right, like complementary colors.
Yeah.
Those are the ones opposite each other on the color wheel, and when you use them together, they create this really strong contrast. Looks pretty cool. And then there's monochromatic, which uses different shades and tints of one base color.
Yeah.
It creates a more harmonious look. And analogous colors, which are 3 colors that are right next to each other on the wheel, That gives you a softer, more blended kind of feel.
Huh.
Oh, and just to clarify, tints are made by adding white to a color, shades by adding black, and tones by adding gray.
Oh, yeah, good point. People sometimes get those mixed up. It's helpful to have those definitions clear. Understanding those basic relationships, though, is really important for making a good color palette. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the space between elements. Spacing. The book is really adamant about consistency here.
Consistency is key, for sure. So as the designer, you decide how much space you want, like how much space between a heading and the text below it. But once you decide, that's it.
Yeah.
You got to apply it consistently throughout the whole design. It's like setting up a visual grid.
Right, like a rhythm. And it really does make a difference. Inconsistent spacing makes things look messy and unprofessional. But when it's done well, it makes the design so much cleaner and easier to read.
Yeah, it's a small detail that can have a big impact. Okay, now here's something that I know people are always curious about. The golden ratio.
Ah, yes, the golden ratio. It's like this magical number, right? Approximately 1 to 1.618. It's a proportion that's found all over in nature, and people have been using it in art and design for centuries.
And it's supposed to make things look really pleasing to the eye, right?
Exactly. The book gives an example of how you can use it to divide a screen, like a 1200 pixel wide screen. You can split it into 2 sections using the golden ratio, and you end up with approximately 741 pixels and 459 pixels. It's a nice way to create visual balance.
Yeah, that's helpful. It's a good guideline to keep in mind. Now, how do we keep track of all these design decisions we're making? Well, the book introduces this really helpful concept, the design guide.
Oh yeah, a style guide. That's essential, especially for bigger projects. It's basically a document that holds all the design rules for a project. Like, it'll have the UI elements, typography guidelines, icon specs, sizing and spacing rules, color palettes, all that good stuff.
It's like the Bible for the design, right?
Yeah.
And make sure everyone's on the same page, and it can really speed things up.
For sure. Especially when you're working with a team. Everyone knows what the rules are, so the designs stay consistent.
Yeah.
Okay, and speaking of consistency, the book really hammers home how important that is in UI design. It goes back to typography and reiterates the 2-font rule. It even gives some examples of fonts that are popular in UI design, like San Francisco, Open Sans, Montserrat, Proxima Nova, Roboto, those kinds of fonts.
Nice. And then it talks about how to use color consistently, right? Like if you use a certain shade of blue for your main headings, you use that same blue for all the main headings across the whole design.
Okay.
It's all about making things predictable for the user.
Exactly. Same goes for things like buttons,
Yeah.
You use the same color for all your call to action buttons so people know exactly what they're looking at.
Okay.
And it goes back to having a design guide, It's all connected.
Absolutely. And then icons are really important too. The book talks about scalability, like making sure your icons are still clear even when they're really small, and sizing them appropriately, especially for touchscreens. You got to make sure people can actually tap on them.
And the style of the icons needs to be consistent too. Like the colors, the line weights, all that. And they got to be aligned properly with other elements on the page.
Totally. If your icons are all over the place, it looks really unprofessional. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about design principles, but where do you even find the resources, for things like fonts, colors, icons? Well, thankfully, the book has you covered. It gives a rundown of some really helpful online resources.
Yeah, it's a good list. For fonts, it mentions Google Fonts, which is great for free fonts, My Fonts, which has a mix of free and paid, and Adobe Fonts, if you're an Adobe Creative Cloud subscriber. And then it mentions some sites that can help with font pairing, which is super helpful because that can be tricky.
It's tough, right? Find the right fonts that work together. And then for color palettes, the book lists some great resources too. Color Hunt, Adobe Color, Coolers, Web Gradients. Those are all good places to find inspiration.
And for icons, it recommends Flat Icon, Icon Finder, and Nucleo. Those are all great sites for finding icons, both free and paid. And the author stresses that it's worth spending the time to find the right resources for your project, the ones that really fit your needs and the aesthetic you're going for.
It's an investment, isn't it? Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this Design Basics chapter. What would you say are the, top takeaways here? What do we really need to remember?
Well, I think the biggest thing is definitely consistency. We've said it over and over again, but it's so important to be consistent in your layout, typography, colors, icons, UI elements, everything. That's what creates a user experience that feels intuitive and polish, you know?
It's all about making things easy to use and understand, right?
Exactly. And then, of course, visual hierarchy is essential. You got to be able to guide the user's eye so they know what to look at first, what's most important. And using typography and color effectively is huge, too. You got to think about contrast, readability, all that. Those are the foundations of good visual communication.
Yeah, and those little details like spacing, visual noise, those things matter. Even though they might seem small, they make a big difference in the overall quality of the design. And the golden ratio, that's a good thing to keep in mind too for achieving visual balance.
Yeah.
And design guides, those are essential, especially when you're working with other people.
Totally agree. And remember, guys, there are loads of resources out there to help you along the way. Don't be afraid to use them.
It's about working smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
Right? And the book itself encourages everyone to take these principles and start applying them. It's all about practice, you know? Practice makes progress. Don't be afraid to experiment, make mistakes, and learn from them.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just one chapter of the book, right? Essentials of UI design go so much deeper. It gets into the actual tools you'll use, different types of UI elements, wireframing, prototyping, even the business side of things.
There's so much more to explore. So what I want to ask you guys listening is, what are you most curious about? What are you most excited to learn more about? And what are the biggest challenges you face when you're trying to create interfaces that are both beautiful and easy to use? Because let's be honest, UI design is always changing. It's a constant learning process.
It is. And I think the most important thing to remember with all these design principles is that it's always about the user. You know, you always have to think about their needs, how they behave, what their experience is like. Because you can have the most beautiful interface in the world, but if it's not usable, it's not successful.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. Until next time.